As the sun sets over the first half of the Formula One season, it gives us the perfect moment to reflect over a season filled with surprises, challenges, amazing performances, and poor race starts from Max Verstappen. The Hungarian Grand Prix proved to be the exception to this trend, not that it was not exciting, but merely because Verstappen managed to finish the first lap without losing a single position. This race was a showcase of old versus new, the master versus the student, and of course, Pierre Gasly versus his own incompetence. So please join me as we review the last race before the summer break and raise a glass to a truly exceptional season, filled with incredible races. Hello and welcome to the TF1 Show. I'm your host, Tines Ferreira, the hairbrush that untangles even the most stubborn of knots that is the world of F1. So what can we say? That Hungarian Grand Prix might have lacked the out-and-out drama of the German Grand Prix last week, but I have to admit enjoying the fact that I was able to follow what was going on lap after lap without having a minor cardiac event every 5 minutes. So let's discuss what happened over this fascinating race weekend. And I think probably, and that's as has been the case most frequently this year, we need to start with the race winners, which is Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton. And I think we can say this is for Hamilton and for Mercedes a bit of a tale of two halves this weekend where, things were a bit, let's say, under pressure for qualifying on the Saturday, and then during the race it all came good and many roles and situations were reversed. Now, I think before we start, I think we just need to make clear that Hamilton is very, very fast around the Hungaroring. And for those who don't know, the Hungaroring is the actual name of the racetrack that they raced at this weekend in Hungary. So, and it's a track that Hamilton really likes, and he's been really fast, and he's won 7 races now after today, so I think it shows that as well. And over the sort of Friday and early Saturday sessions, you can see that Hamilton is very comfortable around the track, and he was consistently faster than Bottas, his teammate, and I think, in real pace terms, faster than everybody else as well. But qualifying went away from him a bit. If you remember, he was sort of under pressure the whole time. I think he did a reasonable job in Q2, but, over Q3, Verstappen and Bottas both outperformed him, and he started on, the third place of the grid, which I think he wasn't very happy with, and you can see that after the qualifying sort of interviews, he wasn't best pleased, and I think he knew that he could have done better, and I think he really went back and thought about how he's going to approach this race, and and as we'll talk about just now, he really did come back and drove a scorcher of a race. But I think before we get there, let's just congratulate Valtteri Bottas on a scorcher of a quali lap. I think he put in a very, very fast lap there, and I was surprised that he actually didn't get pole position. And I think it's also a testament to the good lap that Max Verstappen did over qualifying. But he beats Hamilton convincingly around a track that he loves a lot. So kudos for Valtteri Bottas there. And at that stage, I thought that it looked like Bottas salvaged his weekend and maybe even was on for a really strong performance on a weekend that was actually very important for him in his future. But alas, at the race start, it all fell apart for Bottas. And on that bit of unintentional poetry, let's maybe talk about what happened. And so obviously Bottas started in second place with Hamilton in third, and both of them got away decently. Verstappen, as I've mentioned in the intro, got away well as well. And, things were looking pretty standard. All of them line astern at the first corner. But then Hamilton actually decided that enough was enough, and he got a good sort of run on Bottas into the second corner and went around the outside and actually managed to pass Valtteri with quite an aggressive move, I thought, from Hamilton into the third corner, which then meant, and they actually had slight contact, which could have ended in tears as well, but luckily for the both of them it didn't. And after that, Hamilton was in second place, Bottas was in third, and then just a few seconds after that, Charles Leclerc's Ferrari, who started in fourth, was also sort of, after that skirmish between Bottas and Hamilton, Leclerc was able to close up as well, and he got past Bottas on the straight before turn 4, which then obviously meant that Bottas was now behind Leclerc, and Leclerc sort of swiped across with his car quite aggressively and broke Bottas's front wing in the process, and that effectively meant that Valtteri had a really, really difficult day ahead of him. Since we all know, it's quite tough to overtake at the Hungaroring, and Bottas had to go and get a pit stop and change his wing, and then he was basically plumb last after the first 5 laps, which is, to be honest, a shocker of a start for Bottas. And as I mentioned, on a weekend that is so, so important for him in his future. Now, for those who don't know, Toto Wolff said over the past week, that he'll probably spend, and him and obviously his team will spend the 3 weeks over the summer break to discuss the race seats for next year, and whether Bottas will remain teammates with Hamilton, or whether they will maybe take a chance with Esteban Ocon, who's been their reserve driver this year. And I do think that we saw what happened in Germany last week, and now this one in Hungary, where he finished in 8th. It's not looking good for Valtteri, I think. And I think if there were 2 races that he would have not wanted to have right before this decision was being made, it would have been the one in Germany last week, where he spinned from a good position and crashed and didn't score any points, and then this one here where he came through in 8th place. And I'm worried for Bottas, I'm not going to lie. I don't actually know now, given what we've seen and how sort of it all fell apart for Bottas over the past few races, whether he deserves to have the Mercedes seat next year. Because, as I mentioned last week in my podcast, I don't think you can say he's sort of on equal footing with Hamilton. I don't think you can say that with a straight face. He had a very good and positive start to the year. He's very fast over 1 lap, as we saw again. He's an excellent qualifier, but in terms of the full package, in terms of the racecraft and the race pace and the tire management and sort of keeping a level head under pressure, I don't know whether Bottas is going to be the one. I think there's a really good possibility that Esteban Ocon is going to get that seat for next year. And I'll feel bad for Valtteri, of course, because I think he is a very good driver, and I think he can do very, very good things in the race car. I just think that the pressure at Mercedes and the pressure being Hamilton's teammate is sometimes overwhelming, I think. And we all saw, Nico Rosberg put in that heroic sort of championship challenge in 2016, where he snatched the championship from Hamilton during that year. But I mean, the emotional and psychological toll that year took on him basically meant that he couldn't continue and that he had to retire. And I mean, that's just how difficult it is to hang with the big boys like Lewis Hamilton and someone like Fernando Alonso. So can Ocon do it? I think we're going to have to see. Esteban Ocon, he is a very, very highly rated driver. He's a contemporary of Max Verstappen and of Charles Leclerc, and he was sort of the third leg in that tripod of excellence, if you can call it that. So he is definitely sort of the missing piece of the puzzle in terms of the new generation, the up and coming drivers. Where I think if you think about, Verstappen, Leclerc, George Russell, Lando Norris, Alex Albon, all of those guys, and then Esteban Ocon, they were basically sort of the up and coming group of really talented drivers. So I think it would definitely be very interesting to see Ocon in a Mercedes, Leclerc in a Ferrari, and Verstappen in a Red Bull going head to head. So I'm excited for that. So, and I sort of said, and I think that that's probably the direction I'd predict Mercedes going into, but you never know. Toto Wolff might still think that Valtteri is a the more experienced guy, and he is still a very fast race car driver. So I guess, won't be too surprised if they do give Bottas the seat over Ocon. Now let's talk about Lewis Hamilton and his reputation, and sort of a few things that Verstappen was talking about in the press over the days preceding the race. And for those who don't know, so Verstappen sort of made a few comments where he said that, Hamilton won 5 championships because he wasn't the best car, and that there are many drivers that would have done just as well as he would have in the same position. And basically, it came down to that Verstappen actually didn't rate Hamilton that much as a driver, more that he got lucky because his car is fast. Now, there's no denying that the Mercedes has been, the fastest car over the past 5 years or so, but I think it's very convenient for a lot of people to forget that before Hamilton got in that Mercedes, he, for the majority of the time, did not have the fastest car, and he was still able to, qualify in pole position, and he was still able to win races. I think he holds the record, and if I'm not mistaken, for every single season he's been in F1, and this is his, I think, 13th season in F1, he has won a race in every single year, which I think is an incredible statistic, and I think it invalidates Verstappen's assertions that Hamilton is only successful because of the car that he's driving, because he is one of the few guys, and Verstappen is also one of the guys I include in this, that are able to win races when not having the fastest car on the grid. So, and I think it was interesting, given that Verstappen made those comments this week, that it all boiled down to a Hamilton versus Verstappen race for victory on the day, with Verstappen obviously starting in pole position and Hamilton after overtaking Bottas in second. And it was basically a case of cat and mouse, I felt, for the first half or 2/3 of the race, where Hamilton was sort of able to keep pace with Max, stayed within 1 to 2 seconds. The pit stops, Red Bull came first, and then I think Mercedes thought they could try and extend Hamilton's stint and put him on fresher tires, which they were then able to do, but obviously lost a bit of time to Verstappen, given that Verstappen was then, after the first round of pit stops, on the fresher tires for a couple of laps. But after that, I felt Hamilton just came alive, because on his new set of hard tires, he basically erased a 6-second gap over 2 laps. Like, literally, when Hamilton left the pits, he was, I think, 6 and a bit seconds behind Verstappen, and 2 laps later, he was again within DRA zone, which I thought was scary fast from Hamilton, and I think it sort of was a bit of a precursor to what we were going to see later on in the race. But again, same sort of situation where Hamilton was sort of within 1 to 2 seconds of Verstappen, and the two of them were just in a class of their own when it came to overall race pace. I mean, at that stage, they were more than a pit stop ahead of Charles Leclerc, who was running third at that point. And I think that was basically then where Mercedes pulled a bit of a masterstroke, Mercedes' strategy team, because they then realized that, Hamilton has a whole pit stop effectively for free, because he has a big of a gap. The gap was basically big enough between himself and Leclerc in third, where he can put on another set of tires and still come out in second place, which they then decided to do. And that then meant that obviously Hamilton had much, much fresher medium tires to push on for the last, 15 laps of the race, and Verstappen then, given the big offset in pace between what he was doing on the hard tires and what Hamilton was able to do on the first lap on his medium tires, meant that effectively Red Bull now had to leave him out to try and defend Hamilton, at the end, because if Red Bull had to pit Verstappen the lap after Hamilton, he already would have come out behind him. And I think Red Bull and Max knew that in a straight fight, in terms of race pace, Hamilton would have come out on top. And I don't think Verstappen would have been able to overtake Hamilton had Hamilton come out ahead of him, in the pit stop. So, I mean, Red Bull's goose was cooked, and they just had to sort of watch Hamilton put in lap after lap after lap of just basically incredible sort of qualifying laps, one after the other. I think, it was an amazing performance by Hamilton, actually, to pull back 15 seconds over 12 laps or something. He did 5 or 6 sort of pure qualifying laps within 1/10 of each other. It was literally 18.5, 18.55, 18.5, 18.55, literally one after each other, just pulling 1.5 to 2 seconds over Verstappen every lap. Really, really impressive to see, and I think he obviously loved doing that. And I think he sort of showed that was the perfect how can you say, representation of Hamilton and Mercedes' joint might. I felt those 10 laps. I mean, that was sort of like the past few years just rolled up into one snapshot, where it was the strategy and the team and Hamilton and the car and all of them sort of coming together and just being unbeatable. And I think he really showed why he is in that car, firstly, and why Hamilton has 5 world championships. Because, and this is also a thought that I had after the race, just the fact that Hamilton can sort of more often than not win races like this from sort of 3rd or 4th on the grid is sort of why he keeps winning these championships and winning these titles. Because I don't think anyone else wins races from a lower grid slot more often when it matters than Lewis Hamilton. Obviously, Verstappen had a few cases like that as well. But I think it is also key to just remember. And a lot of people sort of say, Verstappen is actually technically the best driver on the grid at the moment. And I think there's definitely an argument to be made. I'm not going to deny that. But I think how Verstappen and Red Bull have been winning races up to this point is sort of saying, they have nothing to lose. They're not fighting for the championship outright. They can take chances with strategy. They can take chances in the race. Max can be aggressive with overtakes. And, if it does go wrong, they tried, right? So they don't have that pressure or that responsibility in a way that Hamilton has as being the championship leader and fighting for the championship, where, sometimes Hamilton will take the more pragmatic route and Mercedes will, follow the more conservative strategy approach, because they just literally, why would they take that risk? Why would they, take the risk of not scoring any points when, they'll score a full 25 points 80% of the time, and then 20% of the time when a strategy that Verstappen maybe makes or one of the Ferraris makes pays off for them on the day, and then Hamilton comes home in 2nd or 3rd place. That's a much more, acceptable outcome for Hamilton and Mercedes than what Verstappen and Red Bull keeps doing up until now, with their strategy and their sort of approach to the race. So I think, it's all good and well saying Verstappen is the best driver on the grid at the moment, and, look how he's winning races willy-nilly without having the fastest car. But I think we're only going to really see Verstappen's mettle when he's really under pressure and when he has something to lose. And I think we sort of got a glimpse of that today, where Verstappen was agitated over the radio. Like, he was constantly telling his race engineer, what's the gap? Tell me when he's in DRS zone, what's going on? Where is Hamilton? And that's, I don't think, a position he's been in that often. And Hamilton on the prowl in 2nd place in a fast car is quite an intimidating thing. And I think Verstappen sort of felt that now for the first time, where for the first time he was the hunted and not the hunter. And that's a big difference. And I think that's sort of where I think Hamilton is a bit ahead of him still, where he has the experience. He knows how to win. He obviously knows how to win a race. He knows how to win a wheel-to-wheel battle. But he also knows how to win, an inter-team battle, and he knows how to win a world championship. And I don't yet think Max Verstappen is there and has that experience to really draw from when things are really going to get, tough, and when he's going to have to make really pragmatic and sort of the how can I say, take the road of least resistance, if you can call it that. And for Max also to pick his battles, I think that's going to be a really interesting thing, and something that we can keep our eyes on in the future. Now, in terms of the championship, Hamilton is definitely, I think, in the ascendancy. His hold on the championship seems very, very strong now. We're also coming into a part of the season where he's really, really strong. Now, he loves Spa and he loves Monza. He's very good in Austin, Texas, and he's also excellent at Abu Dhabi, which is the last race of the season. Now, and he's also pretty handy around the other tracks as well. Like, he likes Suzuka and he likes, he's not great around Brazil usually, but he likes the track a lot. In any case, I think we can also say that and the last parting thought about the Mercedes team is Hamilton has broken Bottas' spirit over the past few races. I think Bottas is now firmly a number 2 driver, and I don't think Mercedes can consciously and legitimately now sort of say that when push comes to shove and Hamilton's championship needs to be prioritized, that Bottas is now can drive his own race. I think over the second half of the season, he's probably going to have to play the supporting act again. And obviously, we know how well that went down with him last year. So let's see how compliant Bottas is going to be over the second half of the season. All right. Well, that was quite a long discussion just about Mercedes. But let's quickly talk about Red Bull. It was all so well set up for another fairy tale. Verstappen got his first pole position, and congratulations to Max for that. And Max Verstappen put in an excellent lap to pit Bottas for pole position. I really, you sort of watch the onboard of the lap, and you just saw that was a guy that was supremely confident and comfortable with his car, and really, really good lap from Max there. And I think he really, showed Mercedes up here, because I sort of expected them to turn up the power and drive into the distance in Q3. But, Max, he did the deed and he gave the goods. So well done to him for that. Pierre Gasly, another shocker for the poor guy. In qualifying, he was almost a second behind Max, which is grim. I mean, it's pretty grim for Pierre Gasly, I'm not going to lie. In terms of the race, Verstappen, as I mentioned before, he finally got a good start of the line. So at that moment, I think he thought, he can control the race from here. He can manage his pace and make sure that his tires last, the full distance, and he can sort of control strategy. Obviously, didn't turn out like that, as I mentioned previously, but Verstappen, I think he still drove a good race. He was pretty frank about the fact afterwards that he didn't think he had the fastest race car, and I think that's fair. I think Mercedes probably had the race pace on him today, but he did well to keep Hamilton behind. I think Hamilton was pretty relentless throughout. He was really keeping the pressure on. As I said, a 1 to 2 second gap the whole time, but Max resisted. He didn't make a mistake, I think, but strategy played its part, and he was pipped at the post just before the finish line. And but I still think Max, and as I mentioned before in my rant just a minute or so ago, that he is really performing well. He is not making mistakes. He is operating at the peak of his powers, or, well, we don't even know if it's the peak of his powers yet, but he's really putting in good performances. And I think this year is definitely going to be a build-up year for real assault on the title over the coming few seasons. So good job for Max Verstappen. I think he can be satisfied with the end of this sort of first half of the season. And let's see, I think it's going to be a bit tougher for them in Spa and in Monza, but you never know if Max can still put in some really good performances. Now, speaking of good performances, I guess we can't talk about Pierre Gasly, but I'm going to talk about him anyway, because, he was lapped by his teammates again. So Verstappen lapped Pierre Gasly, which is probably the worst thing that can happen to you, especially since Gasly didn't have a particular issue. It's not like Bottas, who had to, replace his front wing or anything. Gasly was just slow. And he got overtaken by Sainz at the beginning of the race, and was sort of stuck there in this quagmire of hopelessness for the full race distance, effectively. So he came home in 6th place, which behind Carlos Sainz's McLaren, which is not good, given that the Red Bull is still a much faster car than the McLaren. If you think about, the pace that Hamilton and Verstappen were driving off into the distance versus the rest was frightening at a stage, and Gasly is not there. I mean, so interestingly, Helmut Marko and Christian Horner said that Gasly's future is safe until the end of the year. So they say he's going to remain in that car right up until the end of the year, where they will then sort of decide on Gasly's fate. But I mean, what are they going to do? What is Pierre Gasly going to do? And again, I feel really bad for the guy, but it's like just he can't drive the car. It's something like where he just can't get anything out of that car, and where it's something, intrinsic with the way the car is set up or the way that the car requires to be driven, but he just can't get any speed out of that Red Bull, and it's costing Red Bull race wins. I really do believe that Red Bull lost the race win partially just because that second driver, or the second car wasn't close enough to the front. Because in an ideal world, you would have wanted Gasly, given that Red Bull was the second fastest, if not the fastest car over this weekend. Gasly should have been in third at least, keeping Hamilton honest. And that's why Hamilton was able to take that second pit stop, because there was such a big gap between himself and Leclerc in third. And had Gasly been, in that sort of time gap, then Hamilton would not have been able to make that second pit stop and then chase Verstappen down for the victory. And all of this is it's costing Red Bull points. And I do think that had they had a more effective driver in the second seat, they would have probably been second in the Constructors' Championship by now. And there's a real chance that Red Bull's going to come third in the Constructors purely because of Pierre Gasly, which is a bit of a depressing thought if you're him, or if you're Christian Horner or Helmut Marko. But so yeah, Pierre Gasly, he needs some massive reset. He needs a miracle over this summer break, and I really, really do hope he can come back in Belgium and just come back revitalized and put in a performance like he did at Silverstone, because Germany and Hungary was really bad, and yeah, I just really feel bad for the guy. So let's see. Hopefully he can turn it around. Okay, let's talk about the red team. So Ferrari, Vettel came home in third, so the final podium position, and Charles Leclerc in fourth, with Vettel sort of overtaking Leclerc 2 or 3 laps from the end, given that Leclerc his tyres was basically non-existent. And I think all you can say about Ferrari is, oh dearie dear. They finished more than a minute behind Lewis Hamilton, which is, I mean, that's, you can measure that in light years in Formula One time, actually, because that's way, way too big of a distance for Ferrari to find acceptable. Let's maybe talk about just how they did over the weekend as a whole. So Charles Leclerc again, and that's sort of been the trend recently, he was the faster car over the whole weekend, if you think about from practice through to qualifying. I think despite this, this is probably the weakest weekend for Leclerc in a while. He made that silly mistake in Q1. Obviously, he was in the dirty air from Sebastian Vettel's car, but you shouldn't be that marginal in terms of grip for qualifying one, where you are almost guaranteed to be safe if you just put in a decent lap in the car that he had. So that was a bit of a silly mistake by him, and he got a bit lucky to not have more damage, since he made sort of heavy contact with the wall with his rear end. But despite this, and this I found quite impressive. So Ferrari sort of fixed up his car, and then Leclerc still outqualified Vettel in the end, which I felt was quite impressive by him, to be able to sort of reset and refocus and still push hard. So it seems that he has fixed his qualifying issues. At least he definitely seems to be more in control, and is I think odds on probably the faster driver at Ferrari over one lap at the moment. But this race highlighted, and he himself actually afterwards said that he is currently struggling a bit with tire management, in terms of not he's wearing out his rear tires too quickly, which is an interesting problem to have. He basically said that he is going to try and improve this and learn from all of this to make sure that things like this don't happen again, which is, I guess, fair. And I'm sure he'll come back strong in Belgium. Now, Vettel had a bit of an anonymous weekend. I think, it was okay. It wasn't spectacular. He didn't pull out any rabbits out of any hats, I'd say. He took a bit of a gamble on the race strategy. He sort of stayed out long on the medium tires, even longer than what Hamilton was able to do, and then switched onto the soft tires and was able to make them last until the end of the race, which then meant that he could, squeeze past Leclerc right before the end and get onto the podium. So I guess that was a good drive from him, I'd say. So a nice podium for him to sign off with before the break. Now, let's maybe just think about where Ferrari is sort of in the mix at the moment, if you think about the bigger picture. Because Red Bull has made massive strides with their car over the past 5 or 6 races. They were solidly the third best car, and now I think probably Red Bull is now the second best car at some tracks, if not most tracks. And I think it's going to be really competitive between Ferrari and Red Bull now to sort of see who's the second fastest car. As I mentioned earlier, Ferrari is probably still odds-on favorite to come second in the Constructors' Championship, just because of the fact that it's basically Max Verstappen scoring points for Red Bull alone, where Vettel and Leclerc is doing a consistently good job of scoring points. But I guess 2 exciting tracks ahead for Ferrari, at least, with Spa and Monza. Spa, obviously the longest track on the circuit, and some very, very spectacular straights and fast corners where Ferrari tends to excel. And then Monza, their home Grand Prix, where it's basically full throttle for the majority of the lap. So, I mean, that should be an electric race with Ferrari, probably odds-on favorites at Monza, and at the home race with the Tifosi. So that's going to be super fun to watch. But I think all's definitely not well for them if you think about where they are in terms of their car. Now, as the secret aerodynamicist predicted right at the beginning of the year, and I've alluded to him quite a few times over this podcast so far, they are sort of in a development mess where they are struggling to add downforce, especially at the front end of their car, and that's mainly due to the design of their front wing. Now, the effect that this has is they're sliding a lot more in slower corners, and that obviously then means higher tire wear, and we definitely saw that this weekend in Hungary, where they were mighty fast over the first fast sector, sort of okay-ish in the second sector, and way off the pace in the third sector, which basically has 3 or 4 slow corners. And unfortunately, this is a fundamental issue in the car that can't be fixed overnight, and Mattia Bonotto already alluded to this, where he said that, it's not going to change over the next 2-3 races. It's a fundamental issue. And I think it's something they're going to have to fix for next year only. I don't think they have time or should necessarily spend the resource to now revamp the whole car for the remainder of the season, because to be frank, I think it's too little too late now. They need to make sure that they nail the concept for the 2020 car so that they can take the fight to Mercedes and now Red Bull as well. Talking about raising the game and, bedding down a car concept early for the next year, what a weekend for McLaren. Again, Lando Norris, he was the star in qualifying. He put in an excellent performance to start in 7th, and Carlos Sainz a good lap as well to start in 8th. Interestingly, again, that Norris was able to out-qualify Sainz, and then, on the Sunday, Sainz was able to flip it around quite brilliantly, where he just drove a spectacular race. I thought Carlos Sainz, he was my driver of the day personally. He's just been so good on the race starts. Specifically, almost every single race he makes up positions over the first lap, left, right and center, and I think he literally overtakes Lando Norris on the first lap every single time, and I think that must be quite annoying for Lando. But yeah, Sainz, he kept the Pierre Gasly in the much faster Red Bull behind him the whole race to finish in 5th. And just a fantastic performance by Sainz again. And this whole first half of the season has actually been a really, really good performance by Carlos Sainz. And that's underlined by the fact that he's now only 5 points behind Pierre Gasly in his Red Bull, which speaks to the horror show of the season that Gasly is having and also the fantastic season that Sainz is having. So well done, Carlos Sainz. Well done, Lando Norris. And well done, McLaren, for a wonderful return to being sort of competitive. Cool. Alfa Romeo, Kimi Raikkonen, I mean, he's like fine wine. He gets better with age and he doesn't reach his full potential at Ferrari. And I just think Raikkonen at Sauber is just a match made in heaven because he just looks so much more in control. He's so much less pressure. He can just drive the car, get in the car. He can drive the car as fast and as quickly as he can. And it's just paying off for him. He's really been, I think, along with Sainz, probably the strongest performer in the midfield, considering all of the races now we've seen. And it's just, really a second win for old Kimi and very well worth his 2-year contract at Sauber. Now, Antonio Giovinazzi had a bit of a quiet race and he just didn't light up the world. He finished in 18th, which isn't great, and he got beaten by Williams, which is also not that great. Toro Rosso, let's talk about them a bit. Another strong weekend for them. Albon coming in 10th and Kvyat in 15th. Really, really spectacular racing between Albon and Kvyat. If you can go and find the highlights, I really strongly recommend you do. It was really cool to see. They were sort of side by side over the first 4 corners of the track with Kvyat coming out the victor there. But Albon had the last laugh, coming in 10th and scoring a point for the team, which is, I think, very impressive. Kvyat had a bit of a tyre issue where his tyres wore down a bit quickly and he got overtaken right at the end by a few cars. But just sort of to wrap up Toro Rosso, I really think that both of these drivers are so talented and they're doing a really good job, and good for them, I think, as well. Good for Alex and for Daniel. Really good performance, I think, by both of them, consistently up there. I think really scoring good points for Toro Rosso. So congratulations to them. Oh dear. I guess we now have to talk about Renault. Now, obviously, it didn't go well for them. I think, especially after Ricciardo saying at the end of Germany last week that, they expect Hungary to be a better track for them. I think they'll be pretty disappointed with 12th and the 14th place in the race. Now, in Nico Hülkenberg's defense, I think he actually had a pretty good weekend. He qualified in 11th, which I think was probably the best that they could do. And he was actually running in the points during the race, which again was pretty impressive for Nico Hülkenberg. He's also been pretty good in terms of race starts, I thought, this year so far. But then he developed a bit of an engine issue and he was basically down on power for the remainder of the race. And that then meant that he was basically a sitting duck. I think he did well to finish in 12th and to sort of stay ahead of some of the other cars. But, I mean, good for him. But I think he would have left some points. So he'll be disappointed with that. Daniel Ricciardo, he had that weird incident with Sergio Perez during qualifying where they were all backing up to start their final flying lap. And then Ricciardo tried to overtake Perez, but Perez didn't want to be overtaken. And then they just ended up screwing over both of their final qualifying laps, which meant both of them basically exited in Q1. Now, we can, however, applaud Daniel Ricciardo for some great overtakes during the race. There was a good one, I think, against Giovinazzi and a good one over Lance Stroll, which was fun to see. So nice to see at least that he still has the ability to pull those hectic overtakes that he loves so much. To summarize, Renault, they would have definitely liked to see a much more successful first half of the season, and I think they'd be pretty disappointed with how things have turned out. I do hope that they can reset and recuperate and come back strong over the second half. I think they are still a strong team with a strong car. They just need stars to align for them a bit better. They just sort of need that one big upgrade to put on the car, similar to what happened to Williams just now, and where it just works and they make a noticeable step forward, and they sort of get that momentum in terms of development and in terms of driver feedback and the such. Now, speaking of making a bit of a jump, now we all saw Racing Point last weekend made a massive step up in terms of their car and their car performance with the upgrades that they brought. But I mean, now it feels like it's just back to square one for them, because this wasn't a great weekend. Overall, both of the Racing Points were out in Q1, and Lance Stroll was beaten by Williams, which isn't great. He also reactivated his streak of going out in Q1, so let's see how long he can keep that up for the coming few races. And just a bit of a one to forget for Racing Point, I think. Although Sergio Perez did do well, I think, in the race to almost get a point in P11, but alas, it was not to be. All right, let's maybe quickly just give a round of applause to Williams, because what a turnaround for them. Williams and George Russell, he was one of the stars of the weekend, I thought. He put in a wonderful, wonderful qualifying lap to almost sneak out of Q1. He didn't quite make it, but if you think about how Williams looked at the beginning of the year and sort of how far behind they were, the fact that George Russell on pure pace was able to almost get out of Q1 and actually out-qualify a few of the other drivers is a testament to Williams never giving up, and also a testament to how talented George Russell is. And what an encouraging weekend for Williams. It was a downforce limited track, Hungary, so you can't really rely on engine power, and they're in touching distance of the midfield. And if you think about the fact that Russell finished ahead of Lance Stroll and Antonio Giovinazzi in the race, it's pretty fantastic, and I think they'll be probably the happiest out of all of the teams going into the summer break. And I really do hope that, given that they are running a Mercedes engine, that they can keep up this momentum, and that Spa and Monza and those tracks will go well for them as well. Cool. Now, the last team that we need to talk about is obviously Haas, and their strange season continues, where they literally have two cars suited to two completely different sets of conditions. It was the most hilarious thing where, if it's cool, then Kevin Magnussen in the newest specification car does really well. And then if it's hot, then all of a sudden Magnussen can't go anywhere at all, and Grosjean in the old spec car does really well. And it's just baffling if you think about, they have all of these engineers and designers, and none of them can figure out what the hell is going on with their car, where the car is literally just performing completely unpredictably and they have no clue what to expect. So yeah, it's just very surprising, to be honest, and I really do hope they can figure it out. But at the same time, it's been extremely entertaining watching Günther Steiner scratching his head, and just everybody, just the faces of confusion. You just look at Haas and you just see confusion, and I just find that sort of hilarious. Just this absolute, all of that knowledge and experience and maths, all of the maths and the code, and nothing works. It's just confusion, and I find that quite funny in any case. Cool. Let's, I think, move on to the TF1 awards that we hand out after every race. The Pastor Maldonado Award for the most dunderheaded deed has to go to Charles Leclerc for his crash in Q1. He had no pressure and almost ruined his entire weekend, but lucky for him, it wasn't the case. Which brings me to the Lewis Hamilton #Blessed Award for luckiest driver, which could in theory have gone to Charles Leclerc for the minor damage he sustained during that qualifying crash, but instead I will give it to Lewis Hamilton for the fact that Red Bull has such a poor second driver at the moment, which meant that he has the opportunity to take a second pit stop and still come out in second. This allowed him to win the race. And we will go full circle with the Nico Hülkenberg Podium Award for unluckiest driver, which goes to Nico Hülkenberg when, after a good start and running in the points, he developed an engine issue which prevented him from taking advantage of a good weekend for him up to that point. Let's please give a round of applause to all of the winners. Usually we leave a Grand Prix with a plethora of questions, and today is absolutely no different. Will Bottas or Ocon be in the Mercedes seat next year? Will we one day be made privy to what Lewis Hamilton was hiding under his swimming cap on the podium? Will Max Verstappen stop saying ridiculous things in the press to rile up Hamilton? And lastly, will Gasly's over-analysis finally lead to paralysis? Much to ponder, I tell you. And that's it for the week, ladies and gents. Thanks for listening in and for tolerating my random rambles about people driving quickly in circles. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment, a rating, or a review. Also, please subscribe so that you are notified when the next episode is out. You can find me on Twitter, where my handle is @TF1 Show, and on Instagram, where my handle is @the TF1 Show. I'd love to connect with you and chat F1. Well, we have 3 weeks left till the next race, but don't fear. I will be back next week with another fun episode of the TF1 Show. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.